There's no poet beneath the skies. The voice will never arise that could sing of my love for my dear infant infant eyes, you are my all. Without your smile, the stars were born, and the moon would lose its glow, and the rivers would cease to flow. I wish you could realize this love I have inside, a love that never dies, for my dear infant eyes. Someday you will grow up. You will grow up and have your problem. Little girl, you must try to be strong. For being strong is the one thing in the whole world that will save you. And always keep room in your heart for love, for love will teach you to care, and in caring you'll find the need for sharing, and through sharing you live a happy life, a joyous life, my dear sweet child. May dreams come true. Make your dreams come true.
My thing, what I hope to do all the time, is to be so completely myself, which that's what I hope I am. To be so much myself that my audiences and even people who meet me are confronted. They're confronted with what I am, inside and out, as honest as I can be. In this way, they have to see things about themselves immediately.
Infinize, you are my all. That you smile, the stars would fall, and the moon would lose its glow, and the rivers would cease to flow. I wish you could realize this love I have inside. A love that never dies. For my dear infinite.
Welcome, welcome. How's everyone today? So I hope you're keeping well. I want to ask someone and introduce us to the rules that will help us. So if I may invite Zanele.
Thank you. Hello and welcome everyone to the space. My name is Daniele and I will be taking us through just a few house rules or guidelines before we. I'd like to start by thanking you for taking time to join us today. And I'd like to remind you that this session will be recorded as well as live streamed on Facebook, and we will ensure to post the Facebook link in the chat box. The recording will be available on Facebook as well as YouTube in case anyone missed the session or you simply want to watch it again. Find us at the Feminist Republic on both platforms. I ask that we please respect each other's privacy and don't take screenshots of the screen or anyone who has their camera on. If you have a question or comment, at the bottom of your screen is the chat icon. which will open up the chat box, and there's an arrow where you can change the settings, and please ensure to direct comments and questions to panelists and attendees. Should you wish to only direct a question to a panelist, click only the panelist option. We have both English and French interpretation available for you today. At the bottom of your screen as well, please click interpretation and choose either the French or the English channel. If you are listening in French, ensure to also mute original audio so that you do not hear the English as well. Please note the interpretation function will be turned off during Nombuso's music sets so we can enjoy what has been curated for us. Other than that, thank you again for joining us, and we hope you enjoy.
Hi, everyone. Zoom and its issues. I hope the interpretation is working well now. Sorry about that. Yes, we've had to do a lot of learning over the past few months around virtual gatherings. So apologies for that inconvenience. Anyway, my name is Melissa Oinena. I just want to introduce our hosts of the evening, and without getting into too much of their time, allow me to say hello. Wherever my greetings find you, feel at home, as we say. Over the years, Urgent Action Fund Africa, where I work, is committed to elevating our support to African women human rights defenders and their movements through rapid response grant making and in ways that are actually rooted in care, in healing, and in justice. We envision that this is an essential political approach in providing the much needed backing for the long and difficult work around transformative social justice. Actually, it's one of the main motivations behind the creation of the Feminist Republic platform. Apologies, I have pets that are very loud and they remind me that I'm just a guest in this homestead. We will be sharing with you communications after this gathering where you can learn more about our journey of the Feminist Republic thus far. The platform itself provides a space in which African women human rights defenders can build, co-create, find community that's supportive of each other, all the while kindling the light that keeps us alive, keeps our needs, our hopes, our aspirations, our dreams, as we sprint, as we walk, as we crawl in the plight, or maybe in the fight for justice. So it's in spaces like this that we really honor your presence and all the experiences you bring along with you. New friends, or those who are returning, once more, thank you so much for contributing to building this community. Welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Your presence is necessary, it's needed. So thank you once more. Today's gathering has been really a culmination of many months, many conversations, and many plans in the making. It is indeed quite a meaningful and radical act to find a moment when we embark on creating the room to heal ourselves individually or collectively, and to also mesh this all in our social and our political action. We are very honored to be in this co-creation with the Africa Ecofeminist Collective, who have been intentional in weaving conversations that spur us to locate ourselves and decipher and find significance in tapping and tending gently to the stories of our mind, our bodies, and our emotions. There are a spectrum of experiences that suggest what is safe and what is not. Also, our anecdotes from times before us, the past and its interpretations, messages and meanings to us today in this moment, to the land and territories that enfold us and lay witness or bear witness our actions over time and space. And so the African Ecofeminist Collective is really reminding us to reactivate our awareness of how interconnected we really are. The speakers place on our paths the remembrance of our sense of Ubuntu, our humanity. It's really interwoven into a plush, vivid fabric. And in some places, there are tears that need repairing so that we get to be whole once more. So I'm inviting you to pay attention to what comes up for you today and after this gathering. Think about what you want to learn about yourself after these discussions and set some intentions to do so. Observe what is emerging. Don't judge it, but just to have a greater understanding of yourself and the time and the work that is needed to prepare and consolidate those tools that are necessary to take care of yourself, to take care of others in the liberation work that disrupts harm, that disrupts suffering, that disrupts the oppression to us as individuals and to others. So find ways to persist, to remain specific, to be strategic, filling yourself with compassion as you imagine, dream, create a space for what is beyond the horizon of our survival, beyond resistance. And in this life, this present moment, which is actually a gift, this gathering could be a great moment for you to awaken to how much power you actually wield and how you might learn to work through discord without betraying your sense of humanity, your sense of Ubuntu, and how perhaps you can remain strong in the battlefields of liberation, how you can practice rejuvenating rather than harming. And while it takes an incredible amount of work, guess what? We are ready. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you for the introduction. We are each other's harvest. We are each other's business. We are each other's magnitude and bond. Gwendolyn Brooks for Paul Robson. I want to thank all of you for joining us today, and especially those who have returned after our conversation last week. It's such a privilege to be in community with you once again. My name is Ruth Nyambura. I am an ecofeminist, feminist political ecologist, and the convener of the African Ecofeminist Collective, which is a loose collective, a network of African feminists who work on the intersections of ecological justice, researchers, academics, grassroots organizers, and who take seriously questions of power around the politics of ecology. So thank you very much for joining us today. And so we are basically, for those who were not there last week, this is a continuation of a conversation with the theme Beyond Survival, Beyond Resistance, Weaving an African Feminist Politics of Regeneration. And I will begin by basically introducing our three panelists today. One who you would have met last week, Nombusa Matibela, because of the music. And so I will start with the first panelist, Moshibudi Motimele. Moshibudi is a doctoral student in the political studies program at the University of the Wits. She's also a Transforming Humanities Through Interdisciplinary Knowledge fellow based in the Graduate Center at Wits University in Johannesburg, South Africa. Her research interests are constantly changing, but seem to be centered around investment in creating space for newly imagined critical pedagogies and thinking about the possibilities and limits of the university as a space to generate emancipatory epistemologies. Welcome, Moshibudi. Our second panelist, dear friend and comrade, Wangoi Wakamonji. Wangoi is called to be a retriever and bearer of indigenous African lifeways and practices for the regeneration of the continent. This manifests through research and teaching on regeneration using academic and indigenous methods, African dance and movement practice, storytelling in written and oral forms, and facilitating public spaces for critical consciousness and decolonial transformations. Her current research is a decolonial project exploring art-centered governance, regenerative justice, African spirituality, life-centered economics, holistic education, and food sovereignty as pathways to regeneration through the wisdom encoded in indigenous African ways of being, knowing, and doing. Wangoi is a hearth keeper of the collective Africa High, which researches, reconnects, and reimagines indigenous African ways of being, knowing, and doing, and convenes spaces to share this to enable healing of colonial violence and trauma, and creation and control of presence and futures that work towards life for Earth, humans, and ancestors. Nombuso Matibela is a feminist educator, researcher, vinyl collector, DJ, and the curator of the wonderful music set, which you just listened to at the beginning of this session. And you'll have a chance to explore halfway through the session, and a long extended set at the very end of this session, which we welcome you to be part of. Welcome very much to the three panelists. And I'm going to start. I'm not gonna take too long with the introductions. And just like last week, I'm going to start by asking the three panelists, and especially Mashibudi and Wangoi, because this is your first time with us today. We'd like to know what has been the political project of your feminist work, of your intellectual work, of your organizing work, and what has it revealed about the possibilities and limitations of transnational, African, and cross-movement feminist solidarities on the continent? What has been your personal political project in the work that you do? Mashibudi, Wangoi?
Do you want me to go first, Wangoi? Yeah, first let me just say...
Mashibudi, we can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Am I the only one who's having a problem? Can everyone hear?
No, we can't hear.
Okay.
We did try unmuting the original audio.
Try unmuting the original audio.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, we got you.
You can hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay.
By
Zoom. No, first, Ruth, just my thanks to you and the Feminist Collective and everyone who's been a part of organizing this and the conversations. A lot of people won't know this behind the scenes, so I definitely want to say that sort of the care and the space that you hold now, you extend even beyond just the actual webinar. And my gratitude to you for all sort of the care and real carefulness that you've taken into this project. I really appreciate it. And I think it's important to note it, because that's not always how these things are run and done. So I come into the space from an educational perspective, and I know I say this often, but words are so important, not only in terms of how it is that we understand the world, but also how we understand our place in it and the limits to which we can rethink, reimagine, or regenerate, as the provocation of this seminar was. And so for me, I want to say that thinking from a place of teaching and learning and pedagogy, it's been so painful to see the ways in which capitalism's reach extends to even the integrity of what we can do in particular spaces. And so Ruth mentioned that I'm interested in emancipatory epistemologies, which just sounds like a long word that could mean nothing, you know. And for me, the importance of emancipatory epistemologies is how do we start to create classrooms, pedagogical practices, and practices of knowledge production, but also dissemination that are rooted in an ethics of social justice, right? And what that then means is, how do we create space then for multiple ancestral epistemologies that we come to educational spaces with, right? Not only those that we take from those spaces. And we know that the school, the high school, the university are all deeply rooted in a colonial and capitalist agenda, which is extremely patriarchal, which is extremely misogynistic, which is extremely anti-Black, which is also extremely disrespectful of narratives of planetary collective imagining that are not capitalist as well. And so for me, then the project of regeneration starts a lot of steps backwards, right? How do we conceptually talk about the type of work and world that we want to do and imagine without falling into the trap of capitalism's powerful cooptation of everything, right? Not only of our labor, not only of our thinking, but also of the limits of our imagination in terms of the words and the concepts that we're allowed to think within, you know. And so I was saying to Ruth and others earlier that for me, the move from resistance to regeneration is not possible within the current lexicon that we have, that is legitimated by both whiteness and capitalism, right? So for me, a big part of that is also how do we instill in younger people on the continent, right? My space has been in South Africa, but across the continent. And I really like the framing of continental vis-a-vis transnational, right? How do we dislocate national borders, which are also rooted in that same racist colonial history, right? How do we think collectively from a continental perspective in ways in which Melissa was really kind to tell us, you know, just breathe in the beginning. But not only that we have spaces to breathe, right? A type of regeneration that's rooted in bigger claims that we make for ourselves beyond survival, right? So for me, an example that I like to make for my students is that, you know, breath is the difference between life and death. And no longer will we be limited to the type of survival politics in which we're constantly surviving to either live or to die, right? And the example that I use is that if you think of the physical violation that comes with sexual violence, that comes with particular type of labor, that comes with slavery, right? People were still breathing through the wound, as the saying goes, right? But they were bleeding at the same time. And for me, to be bleeding, to be battered, to be torn, breath is not a win, right? That is no longer what we're calling and claiming for ourselves. And so for me, it's about going beyond that politics of survival as this was framed, and acknowledging the harm that people live with, acknowledging that capitalism has organized all of planetary life, right? And that means not only consumption and production, but also importantly, how we understand ourselves, how we think of ourselves in relation to others. And so the political project then, for me, is to find new lexicons to claim what we want and imagine the worlds that we want to live in that don't have to be legible to power, right? Ruth also spoke about this anchoring of power, because so much of resistance is speaking in ways that power can identify, right? What is it that we lack? Oh, we want rights, we want protection, we want not to be raped, we want equal pay, and all of these things are important. But what happens when we allow power to overdetermine the ways in which we make claims for our lives is that we get stuck in the cycle of resistance, right? Constantly speaking back, constantly asking for, and of course, constantly being either co-opted or denied. And so for me, then, why that reimagining goes back to the space of words and concepts and of ideas is that the first thing we have to do is to reinstill our integrity in ourselves. And no one is going to allow us to do that, right? Because Black women from the beginning of time have been seen not only as disposable, right, but as property, as entitlements for other people's, whether it's pleasure or relief, etc. And that's important because then it gets to the roots of what does organizing look like, what does activism look like, what does claim making look like. And I was really honored to be able to listen to the talk yesterday evening by Erica Huggins and Angela Davis, right? And something that Erica said that really struck with me was that the narrative that we have of the Black Panther Party is of the Black berets, it's of the guns, it's of the sort of militant, masculine type of image, right, of Black men and women. And she said that the most important work they did was in the schools, right, that they created with completely newly imagined curriculums where something like yoga is not a self-care pleasure, right? But how do you teach Black children in the ghetto to take time? Something that they've been denied, right? Their lives can only be read within the script of capitalist accumulation, of work. And you see it even now all over with sort of Black governments across the continent is, our Black youth need jobs. They need education, but what is that education, etc. And for me, that was a really beautiful moment to say that one of the core functions of the work that they did is to give Black children, right, the entitlement for space to just sit and be with oneself, right? And this was a core function of the curriculum, right? Not narratives of STEM, so we can have science, technology, maths, the fifth industrial revolution, which are just further interpolations of Black bodies into racial capitalism, right? And why don't they want to give us space to breathe? It's because it's in those moments where you can sit with yourself as someone who's whole, as someone who is deserving of a future that you can script for yourself, right? It's in those moments, I believe, that a new language can be born that can hold our multiple ancestral epistemologies, right? And that's not what they want. And so for me, as Ruth said, I've been thinking about the limits of the current spaces and educational spaces within which we work. For me, it's a university. For lots of my peers, it's in primary and secondary schools. And the provocation that I've taken is that we need new spaces, right? Why? Because to change the cultural logics of institutions, we know is almost impossible, right? And we've seen different mutations of capitalism. We've seen how it swallowed different movements for decades, centuries, etc. And so for me, I've really taken on that challenge, which is to say that a politics of visibility is no longer sustainable. A politics of calling on power to recognize you and to give you certain entitlements is no longer sustainable, right? A politics of being apologetic for wanting to be with oneself in ways that the world does not allow or think permissible is also no longer acceptable. And because we know the punitive hand of power, right? Because we know the violence that comes with thinking for ourselves, imagining otherwise. Thus, we have to think strategically and subversively within the type of narratives then that movements like Black Power get known for, which is to say that we can't be sorry for the fact that we will protect the right? We will protect the right of ourselves and our people to self-authorize. And however that protection wants to be understood is for power to interpret and to speak back against, right? But I think that it's not even a politics of respectability, but there's this insistence on presenting ourselves in a Gandhi-esque way, which I think is completely messed up and completely irrational, considering the fact that whilst fighting to breathe, we're bleeding, right? And blood, as we know, is intergenerational. And so the trauma, the scars, the fatigue that we carry, we're passing on to future generations. And so I'll just end by saying, for me then, the political project really is about both subversion, but also a strategic regeneration, as Ruth has framed this conversation, because we need new narratives, we need new tools, but also we need a new politics in which we're okay with knowing that we can never be seen as dignified people within racial capitalism and from power. And I think a lot of times we're not okay with that. And that's what holds us back from the next step of doing that type of social reconstruction, where we have our own schools, where we have our own healthcare facilities, where we have, you know what I mean, like a curriculum of life. Because of the curriculum of Black children doesn't start when they enter schools, right? It's your life is scripted from birth, with both the intergenerational trauma that we carry, but also a world that we're born into that already has created cartographic limits on who you can be and who you will be. And so for me, I really want to hold on to the value of educational spaces and the hope of emancipatory epistemologies, right? Which is what? Let's give visibility to those knowledge production traditions on the continent that already exist, that are rooted in an ethics of social justice. And that means a lot of unhappy institutions, a lot of unhappy funders, a lot of unhappy also women and Black people who've accepted the politics of assimilation and integration. And I think a lot of the times people have not seen the space for something new. And so I don't come from a space of judgment at all. I come from a space of, let's open those moments of rupture, put ourselves on the line and create something new. And whilst doing that, give hope to those both before and after us that a different way is possible. And that can only be subversion, because I'll say again, the two things we know of capitalism, of racial capitalism, is one, that it's organized all of planetary life, but also two, that it functions on the basis of incessant violation and violence against Black bodies. And so it's a risk, but I think it's one we have to take. And I just want to end by reading a poem by Maisha Jenkins, who sadly passed recently, a Black woman poet. And for me, poets have been doing that work, right, of thinking outside of these rigid, overly determined spaces, in narrating the lives of Black women since the beginning of time. And I think Maisha's loss is a huge one for all of us. And I just like to end by reading one of her poems, so that we also hold her in the space, right, and the contribution that she's made. And so the poem is called When Tomorrow Comes, which I thought was fitting. Tomorrow begins with the end of today, every piece eaten and digested, moments lingering on my tongue. It begins when I am satiated with now, ready to give up the tedium that hides me from living. It begins when I realize that someone has been knocking at the door and I rise to open it. So rest in peace, Maisha, but also this is also just gratitude to the work of Black women poets across the world and on the continent and in this country who've subverted, right, with these narratives of our lives, and that continue to create possibilities for new and different worlds for us in ways that I find extremely helpful and I'm extremely grateful for.
Thank you very much. So we've, that didn't seem adequate, because what you said is so Someone has asked you actually on the in the chat box to speak the truth and shame the devil, and I couldn't put it any better than that. But I will ask you to continue for a bit more because we've just lost. Wangoi is experiencing a bit of technical difficulties, but they will be back. But just in continuation of that, when you speak about Shibudi, when you speak about the kind of language, the kinds of confines that we find ourselves in as African feminists, one of these confines is the NGOization of beyond the academy, right? Because also the academy is, in terms of, this is not to say that the academy has always been, there's this glory time when the academy has been this bastion of radical politics. It's had radical scholars and thinkers and whatnot, but it's not had this, history of being particularly radical. That would be to basically erase particular histories. But beyond, whether it's the, neoliberalization of education or the kinds of colonial education systems that we've inherited on this continent and the ways we view ourselves and this afterlives of colonialism. Beyond that, we also have the NGOization of very radical politics, which in many instances feels like this is a space for progressive, radical feminist organizing to happen or take place, but it's actually been a space to stifle imagination, where we sort of, feminists on the continent are sort of, stuck in a situation where, the goals for liberation becomes, the timesheet becomes the goal for liberation, or, this idea for liberation. So we have the timesheet, we have the, the funding models, the radical funding models that exist and continue to exist in very many spaces on the continent are sort of tied to the proposals that we can write. Instead of a real connection with radical movements organizing, many of us have sought to come into radical organizing spaces to sort of, lead, begin movements, be the leaders of particular movements. And I'm wondering, like, what do you think about that in terms of expanding that analysis of the spaces that have made it very difficult for us to not only imagine liberation, true liberation, but also stifle the kind of freedom dreams that we can have as feminists on the continent, but also completely shut down possibilities of organizing across movements and across different countries and different borders.
Right. So I think, can you hear me, Ruth? Perfect. So I think a question, and I want to speak now to the collective that you've named, right? To African ecofeminists and just African feminists and all the spaces that they exist. And I think the first question of self-reflection is, what are the ecologies of belonging that we prioritize, right? What are the ecologies of belonging that we prioritize? Because it is a very commodified rationale that leads people who have good intentions, right? At the beginning, I've seen so many people fall into this trap where they get caught up into now becoming bureaucratic engines of just, making requests to capital, to, funding and all these big organizations, etc., where we lose the original ethic of the work. And it's because the ecology of belonging now becomes the sort of global NGO network rather than the communities we first seek to serve to begin with, right? And I think going back then to why sort of the schools are important, etc., is that when you're rooted and in an ecology of belonging that can be whole without the donations of capital, right? That can be whole, then the work you do in that bureaucratic, administrative, financial role then becomes subversion, right? It's strategic, it's intentional, and it's not done with any blindness to what it is that those transnational NGOs represent, or that transnational capital that is giving these $1 million donorships represents, you know? And so for me, I don't think to be radical is to turn away from sort of some of the resources that we need, that we can bring back and, you know, plow back into communities. But I think what happens is, because we don't clearly define, right, what it is that those ecologies of belonging that we're rooted in are, something just as small as putting a national label on something, right? Which is why I resist transnational, because what are national borders? What do they represent? They seek to dislocate the type of collectivity that African feminist work is rooted in, right? And so for me, sometimes to talk about Ghana, Kenya, South Africa solidarity, and I'm like, no, because the principle cannot be divided nationally, right? So if the principle of the organizing is based on the world we want, and we had this conversation as well, Ruth, is to say that the problem with solidarity is that people imagine what is our lack, what it is that we're claiming, and can we link up together and make bigger noise for that claim. But again, like I said, we forget how smart capital is, in that when it denies you, it's already made a plan for when it's going to integrate you, right? So let the cry be for human rights, right? Because in that acceptance, there's a denial of humanity that's already there, right? And so for me, I was saying what's more important with regards to solidarity is not what is our collective lack, but what is our collective freedom dream, right? And what principles should it be rooted in? What is the world that we imagine? Why is that important as well? Well, feminist movements know that the continent over, women have been the bedrock of liberation movements, right? And in those movements were violated, were raped, were harmed, all under the narrative of, you know, well, one thing at a time. Let's deal with national liberation now, and then we'll deal with the equality of women later. And it hasn't happened, right? And the violation and the violence and the harm continues. And so for me then, conversations around solidarity and linking up is that we shouldn't be crying together. It shouldn't be, you know what I mean? Let's come together and mourn what it is that capital denies us. No, that's a good space to have that conversation, but that can't be the bedrock of solidarity, because we might still be imagining different things that inflict different types of harm on different groups of people, right? Which is why sort of Black LGBTQI collectives have been the most insistent on this. And it's because they've suffered the most harm continuously, even in progressive radical spaces, which is to say the sort of neoliberal capitalist temporal progression of activism, right? Free all of us, then the woman, and then, you know, the queers, whatever, is just, it's the same narrative of hierarchization of humanity, in which Black women will remain at the bottom and will continue to suffer. And so for me, I always say, what is the world that you imagine, and what is the space of Black women in it? And depending on that answer, we can have a conversation about whether or not solidarity is possible.
Thank you so much, Moshibudi. And Wangoi is back. Wangoi, welcome back. I'm not even going to say anything because last week, I had a blackout in the middle of speaking, so I'm not going to say anything. I'm happy that you're back with us, and I will go back. I mean, Moshibudi has taken us on this beautiful journey of possibilities and you know, expanding the borders and terrains of thinking. And I'll go back to the very first question, Wangoi, about what has been your political project so far. Oh dear. Wangoi?
Can you hear me? Okay. Cool. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Cool. Yes, so internet decided to internet. I would like, on that question, I would like to start with just saying how important the question itself is. because I think, and thank you for asking it, Ruth, because I think often we don't stop to look back, we don't stop to reflect on how we got to where we are. In you know, thinking around the stickiness of resistance as the mode by which we think and operate and what we center. One of the things that gets lost is, why are we doing this again? You know, what was at the core of our motivation, and as Moshibudi says, you know, not the lack, but the abundance. You know, what is the desire? And can we still sense a connection to that desire? So for me, my project in looking back to kind of trace all of the things that I've been doing, I would frame it as crossing thresholds between unseeing and seeing. And what I mean by unseeing and seeing, I'm using seeing like sight, but I use it to mean a broader awareness, knowing, coming to knowing, than just, you know, using the visual sense. So coming to seeing, catching sight of our fullness, of our wholeness, of the possibilities that are inherent to our beings, and also of the fullness of our relationships, the fullness of possibilities of community, the fullness of relationships with the earth, relationships with ancestors and other spirits. And coming to that, you know, coming to that catching sight of our fullness has had to mean understanding all of the ways in which we have been unseen, all of the ways in which, you know, who we are, what is possible, where abundance lies, that we are full human beings, all of the ways in which that has been blocked, that sight has been robbed, that knowledge has been hidden, and remembering that there is more, to the single stories or the narratives, the frameworks, the laid out paths that we are sold or given or forced into, remembering that there's more, to being alive, that there's more to being human. I think for me, there's always been this dissatisfaction with what is presented as, you know, the narrative of you are born at the age of 4, you start going to school. At the age of 18, or maybe sooner, maybe later, you finish school, you get a job, you work at the job, maybe you get married, maybe you have children, and then you die. Like, no, that's not why we came to Earth. That's a very boring reason to have come to Earth. And I'm speaking from a recognition of indigenous African practices. I don't want to say belief, because belief makes it sound as though it can be unbelieved. But practices, the living out of the truth that we come to do something, and we choose to come to Earth. And for me, that story of just like that capitalist story is boring. It's like, I wouldn't have signed up to come down here for that. So there's dissatisfaction with that story and that narrative as it's given to us. And as such, for what is this that is more? What is this that is silent? What is this that, you know, our institutions, our families, our whatever it is you've grown up in, whatever has conditioned you to be who you are, has been silent about, has hidden from you, and trying to recover that. So remembering our purposes, remembering our reasons for being, crossing threshold to begin to catch sight of our fullness. Who am I as a full human being? And it's a process of reclaiming capacities that either I threw out or I was never taught, reclaiming capacity to feel, reclaiming capacity to know in different ways than just, you know, through very narrow ways of knowing. reclaiming capacities to be in relationship with earth, with plants, with animals, reclaiming capacities to be in relationship with ancestors and other spirit guides. Reclaiming all of these capacities for me is like that broader catching sight of my fullness and catching sight of the fullness of possibility that can be there when we are in community. And so that has meant also, how do we create and rebuild community, where community has often been broken down and has often been the site of a lot of pain. And creating spaces so that we can all collectively do that, collectively expand our abilities to see, expand our abilities to know, expand our abilities to be aware of all of why we are here. I think a lot about this phrase, like from the roots. It was like, it's the phrase that I use to describe a lot of my work. And once I shared that with someone and they said to me, no, it should be back to our roots. And I said to them, and I thought about it, I was like, well, when you think about reclaiming and all of the variations of reclaiming, it can sound like, okay, we're going back to our roots. And there is that within that, and there's that within kind of my understanding of what my purpose, what my project is or has been. But for me, it's about, what do we do after we go back to our roots? What do we do after we've caught sight of our fullness? What do we do after we've reclaimed our humanity? And that is the piece for me that I'm most interested in, that we reclaim our capacities to see ourselves, we reclaim our capacities to be in relationship with ourselves, with earth, with ancestors, in community, so that we can do the magical, beautiful things that we came to do. And some of that might be in conversation with the things that we realize have unseen us in the past, but it's a question of what is at the center, you know? So we don't center the unseen, we center the fullness of sight, and we build from there, and we imagine and we dream, and we come to do the beautiful things to add beauty to earth, as in the traditions that I practice, as we came to do. Yeah.
Wangui, sending you the biggest hug. Thank you. Thank you so much to both of you. I am also very emotional right now. And before we go on a break, I'm going to go back to you, Wangui, and then to Moshibudi. Last week, one of the quotes from one of the posters for the two webinar series was, "I don't want to resist, I want to subvert." And this, of course, as I've said, this I stole from you, or I collectivized from you, or it was I made it part of the commons. You would understand this. So I want you to speak a little bit about the headspace you're in and what you meant when you said that. I don't want to resist, I want to subvert. Yeah, I'd like to hear more of that. I'm sure everyone would love to hear more of that, because it has generated quite a number of discussions within the team that has organized this, but in other spaces, a number of people have said that, but no, we have to keep on resisting, right? Are you saying that we shouldn't resist anymore? We should just sit and roll over? But it means much more. And I'd like to hear you tell us where you were when you were thinking about, I don't want to resist, I want to subvert, to you, and then over to Moshibudi in terms of how she's also engaged with that. Subversion, not resistance. Well, it's not a if or, but why it's subversion, not resistance necessarily? And how can we subvert from a point of tenderness, a point of care? And as both of you have said, how do we resist from a point of abundance, right? How do we do that? And how do we make a greater political project of not just survival, where we are breathing, but we are bleeding, not just resistance, where we find ourselves in a situation where we're constantly guarding the gates of the barracks, but from subversion, which then implies that, or the vision becomes, I am dismantling, I am building anew, I am recovering, but just not recovering. I am dreaming new freedom dreams, and I'm creating the infrastructure for that.
Wow, okay. So I'll start by saying, and I'm crying from one eye. I have no idea why. I'll start by saying that, like, bit of a phrase, like, in its fullness. So it was, I don't want to resist, I want to subvert, I want to dismantle, I want to create. I have had this relationship with resistance that is, I would call it fear, because when I have my sense, my embodied sense of when I am in resistance is that I begin to lose myself. I begin to lose myself in the sight of the other. I begin to lose myself in the hold of the other. I begin to only draw out boundaries of possibility according to what the other that I am in resistance to will allow. What the other makes possible becomes all of what is possible for me. And in that sense, I have lost myself. And just as I was saying about, I think there's more. I think there's more than being face to face, toe to toe, in resistance with a thing, an institution, a person, in terms of all of the fullness of possibility that life holds, and that we are here to co-create with life. So I think about subversion as, and let me say one other thing about that kind of that face-to-face, toe-to-toe resistance. One of the other things that kind of a visual that has come to me is about when I'm in face-to-face resistance only with something, I begin to become that thing. And this is where my fear is. In the losing myself, I'm also beginning to become this thing that I'm in resistance to, that I'm actually against, or that I hope to be against. But staying only in that place, my face begins to match the face of the thing I'm against. My body begins to contort itself to match, the hold of the thing that I'm against. So I think of subversion as, if you imagine, like, let's say there's a fence. I haven't thought about this metaphor before, so apologies if it doesn't come out right. So imagine there's a fence. For me, subversion is to find the ways to go around, below, above, and not directly, just directly face to face with that thing. I think of dismantling as taking the thing apart completely, like does not exist anymore. I think of creation as we build new, we imagine, we dream, we make, we create. So the three of those together for me are spaces where I still have power. I have agency. I haven't lost it to the thing that I am in resistance, or that I am against. Was that English? The thing that I'm against.
Doesn't matter, it's our English.
So in that space, the thing that scares me about resistance is I've lost, like, I'm no longer me, I no longer have power, I am constrained by, the imagination of another. When I am subverting, when I am dismantling, when I am creating, and I'm saying I, but, when community does, because there's many examples of how in our movements in the past, our movement ancestors have done this. When we are in that space, we know we are human, we know we have agency, we know we have power, and we are acting. We are using that power to co-create, to do something, regardless of whatever other person's, sphere of imagination, sphere of possibilities, boundaries of what what we are able to do. We're going past that. We're going beyond that. So that is like how I think about that, beyond resistance, subverting, dismantling, creating. Yeah, I think there was another section to your question, and I don't remember now.
Oh, let me tell you, I'm also wondering what that other section was. I'm so taken in. I wish I was a participant, not moderating, because I'm completely in the thing right now. But let's go to Mashibudi, and then we will, when I remember that second part of that question, we'll come back to you. But so Mashibudi, what do you think of that when we say I want to? And I mean, Wangoi has elaborated. It's a much longer quote. I just picked up one half of the quote. What do you think of I don't want to resist, I want to subvert? And just in terms of thinking of it in terms of the possibilities for feminist for feminist liberation.
And I think there's so much that I'm muted again.
Oh, we can't hear you. We can't hear you. Or I can't hear you.
Can you hear me
you
now?
You need to do that unmute audio thing.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
We have you. Yes.
Phew, Zoom. No, that was so much that I want to just co-sign that was said before. Because like I was saying in the beginning, so much of resistance has become claims to be seen, right? By power, which of course exists to not see us, right? And so much of resistance has become being trapped in a language of nationalisms, capitalisms, racialisms that don't adequately represent us. And so, I was just co-signing everything that was being said, because for me, what subversion does is that it allows us to, one, live with contradictions, which even as African feminists we have, right? There's no one without contradiction. So it allows us to hold space with and live with alleged contradictions, right? What is said to be contradictions, and still present ourselves to the task of creating anew. And for me, this idea of also dismantling, I've sat with and thought about, because, I've wondered, like, who built this thing for it to be my burden to dismantle? You know what I mean? I understand the burden of dismantling at the point in which I now can't breathe, I must bleed, I can't be because of, right? But I think the tank is already on reserve fuel, because that is what this world has demanded of us. And I think in those moments in which we can collectively bring together the energies that we have left, we need to spend more of that time thinking about the creation and not just the dismantling, right? Or thinking about the dismantling at the point in which it comes up against what we're trying to create. And I think this is what subversion is about. Subversion is not a call for recognition or representation, because how can whiteness ever hold the full beauty that is us, right? How can the type of extractivism, violence, misogyny that represents the current world that we live in, and its environmental racism, its planetary scavenging, what is there to recuperate? I'm not sure that makes sense, but what would that project of recuperation be? And so for me, I think why I'm trying to invest my energy rather in creation now is because what the project of resistance and dismantling also does and this is why I loved what Wangoya was saying about seen and unseen, is that it makes unseen the work of African women since the beginning of time that exists outside of these logics, right? So now you must break and dismantle and build anew. And that is only within a particular visibility of a particular worldview, right? Other worlds exist within this world, right? Regardless of the precarity of that existence. And so I think also a lot of the times for us, it's not about a temporality of going back, right? Back to the root, back to our pre-colonial, pre-slavery, pre-apartheid. But sometimes I think it's about dislocating the dominance of this world so that we begin to see the other worlds that have existed and that continue to exist around us, right? Sometimes I think the burden is not as great as we make it out to be, because our ancestral lineages remain, both within us and outside of us and within, our environments. And so it's really just about the looking glass that power prioritizes, right? And what it does to our own worldviews. And so I think a lot of the work still remains conversations with ourselves about whose narratives have dominated the ways in which we see ourselves and those around us. And how much has that affected how we understand the work that needs to be done, right? Which is to say, how much of our activism is actually scripted outside of the world in which we actually want to create. And so that type of self-reflexivity, I think, or collective reflexivity, is crucial because one, it gives visibility to the work of people who might not even call themselves African feminists, right? Because they don't exist within the space where those types of narratives or categorization are even necessary, right? So how much of the unseeing do we need to begin to see? How much of those things, like when Guru is talking about, we are haunted by so many things in the space that's been overdetermined, right? By whiteness, by capital, by racism. And for me, it's about how do we sit with those things that are haunting us, right? But also, how do we sit with a comfortability that those things will never be legible, respected, or prioritized by those who unfortunately have the means to take our breath? These are important questions, I think. And I think the more we sit with them, the more we realize that there's also an unseeing of ourselves that we need to do, right? So that we can show up and talk about our desires and talk about what it is that we want to create and not have to mention the other, or not have to mention the labels within which we've been interpolated by the other. And for me, that's the beginning of Freedom Dreams, right? It's just, how do we create space that allows Black women to show up in contradiction, in conflictedness, in trauma, but also in hope and also in belief, right? And I know that belief gets given this type of thing, but in belief of whatever it is, and in ways in which care is not another trope to be, co-opted and made something else, but really is the pedagogy of how we exist with one another and for one another. And for me, that's why I appreciate spaces like this, because there are people who will watch this and it will completely go beyond, past them, right? Oh, those Black women are crying again about whatever it is. And yet for me, the beauty of the space is immense, right? The holding of the space is crucial. And that doesn't require a legitimation by anyone else other than the people who are in the space who feel held in the same way. And I think it's beyond important, and it is the work of creation to come into a space and be allowed to feel your whole self, and yeah, and to speak in tongues, as it may be, you know, that is the work of regeneration. Because I mean, the last thing I want to say is that it is also a very capitalist mentality that you have to break something to make something else, right? That you must conquer in order to build a nation, you must genocide others, right? In order to build an economy, you must destroy the environment. That type of, you know what I mean, crude binary. And so I think it's possible to create that for multiple moments and modes of creation to exist without having to adopt the logic of destroying, destructing, breaking down, killing off, you know, that type of language. And I think it's those subtle things that we need to pay attention to, because of course the subversion that has been done by African women since the beginning of time has been without having to pillage others. And I think that's important.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm not even gonna say anything. No, I'm not gonna editorialize on this. And just like last week, I'm gonna ask us to take a pause. As we said last week, and as we said at the beginning, this space has been curated in a very intentional way. And oftentimes we don't get the time to pause when we engage with others, when we are in community with one another. So we are going to take a 5-minute pause. And I know this is not common in other webinars, but this is not a common webinar. We're going to take a break. We're going to take a musical break. And it's not just a musical break. The music has been curated in a very particular way. We're going to listen to Nombuso's set for 5 minutes. Please stay on, don't leave. And then we will return for final question and comments, and we will be done by the top of the hour. So please stay and allow yourselves to just, for the next 5 minutes, you know, go take a bathroom break, have a glass of juice, milk, tea, whatever you want to have, and just listen to the music and pause and reflect with the words that we've had from Nombuso the words you hear from Nombuso and the music, but with Mashibudi and Wangoi. So I hope to see you back in 5 minutes. Don't switch anything off. We're going to just switch off our videos. Nombuso is going to take us to the next space. Nombuso?
ubuhlungu bungaka nomphefumulo awusho lutho awusizwile madoda awusikathela awubuya Nkosi awusizwile sishaywa sithathelwa sisebenziswa awusizwile madoda sincenga sithandaza siguqa awubuya Nkosi buya Jesu buya Musa asizwile awusizwile madoda
We were spanked for each other's sins, spanked in syllables and by the word of God. Before dark meant home time. My grandmother's mattress knew each of my siblings, cousins, and the neighbors' children, morning breath by name. A single mattress spread on the floor was enough for all of us. Bread slices were buttered with irama and rolled into sausage shapes. We had it with black rooibos. We did not ask for cheese. We were filled. My cousins and I would gather around one large bowl of umkusho. each with their own spoon. Sugar water completed the meal. We were home and whole. But isn't it funny that when they ask about Black childhood, all they are interested in is our pain, as if the joy parts were accidental. I write love poems too, but you only want to see my mouth torn open in protest, as if my mouth were a wound with pus and gangrene for joy. For joy, Black Joy by Koleka Putuma. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. The poem is pasted on the chat because I do know that I tend to speak very fast. I love this poem, especially the final part where Black children, Black people, where we're able to, well, Koleka testifies not just of our trauma, but of our joy and celebration and the possibilities of our lives. And I love it so much. And I constantly read it to myself, especially when I am feeling particularly down. I remember that. I remember the wholeness of my life and my being and the spaces that I'm in and the people that hold me. Thank you so much for the music, Nombuso. Thank you so much for everyone who has stayed behind. I hope the time for reflection was good. I hope also that you've refreshed yourselves. And I will go straight to the very final part of this discussion. And I'll start with a question to both. Actually, in this question, I will go to both. We'll go to Nombuso, we'll go to Wangoe, and we'll also go to Moshibudi. And it's very simple. It's almost like one of those workshop questions. It is, but it's not. How can our movements, how can our spaces, how can we co-create a politics of regeneration? How do we co-create a politics of life, a politics of health, healing, joy, celebration, rest, tenderness, the commons? How do we breathe life into these visions of a liberated world for our collective selves? How do we do that? How do we imagine it? Nombuso, we have heard from you in a different way. We want to hear from you now in another way. We'll start with you.
Sure. Thank you. Just want to say hi to everyone who's here and thank you for joining us. And Ruth, it's a workshop question, but it's a hard one, you know. For me, I think I'll probably just answer the question in terms of like the types of spaces that I think make me feel safe, like politically, you know. And then that allows for any sort of like regeneration, like regenerative politics to take place. I think spaces that allow us to like be able to like hold our contradictions. And I think I kind of like spoke about this a bit last week, but like for me, it's important to be able to be in politics and in community with people where we can negotiate discomfort, you know. And I think through those types of interactions, those types of politics that you're referring to then like come out. But the question of how that is done at the level of practice, for me, it's very difficult. And I think like music is really one way of answering that question for me. Always has been and probably always will be. The ways in which like, you know, arts, or at least arts as a practice allows us to be able to like be in conversation with each other, to have those difficult conversations that sometimes I find are quite impossible to have in like political spaces that are like based on like organizing in a movement where we have a meeting, for instance, we meet, or in a protest or a picket situation. I think if we open up our movements, as people have already, into like different forms of organizing and different forms of expressing ourselves, and understanding that there are different like lanes and different like ways of actually like pushing for the sort of politics or the sort of like project that we want to see. So some people, and most people, most of us will be involved in like protest, will organize on the ground, and some people may find different ways of doing that. And I think where for me, when I've been in movements that have had an understanding of that need, of like a very like understanding of like culture like as a weapon, I find that we're able to hold more space for more people, because all human beings have an artistic expression, and especially people who are interested in a social, you know, justice like orientated world, whether they are academics. For me, that's a form of artistic expression, involved in theory, like academic theory, or whether they are artists on a stage or artists, you know, on the streets or whatever. If we have movements that start to see that everything that we do as human beings or as oppressed people, everything that we do is political, and has social meaning, and whether it's on the nose or not, when we start to have that viewpoint, I think it allows room for more people to be able to express themselves and feel safe, and not always feel that they need to perform politics in a specific way, because then that makes it very difficult for people to feel like to be able to think and imagine a world when the ways in which they imagine the world, those ways are not accommodated in those spaces that they are involved in. Yeah.
Mbuso, you know, one of the things that I think I've had this discussion with quite a number of people is, for example, every single part I've been on this world, I've always found a mural or, you know, a picture of Bob Marley. And I think about how reggae music has been so instrumental in the radicalization of so many people across the world in ways that these other ways that we know our process of radicalization have not been able to do. I think about Redemption Song. Last year, I was in Tunisia on the border of Algeria with comrades working on food sovereignty. And the music was playing. And I was thinking, my goodness, you know, it's such a, you know, such a remote area, not just of, you know, the country, but of the world, right? This very small place in the desert. But like Redemption Song is something that was played, and even in the bus that we were using, the bus driver playing reggae music, and it made me think how, I mean, it goes back to what you're saying, you know, the politics of art as a, you know, as a tool for liberation, you know, and as a weapon of, you know, culture being a weapon of liberation. And that's something that has to be taken very, very seriously. I really just needed to say, I really wanted to say that. So
sorry, can I just say one thing? Even like the music, that like the tracks that I chose for the introduction and the middle part, when I was thinking about the music, I was thinking about like, you know, the politics of tenderness. What does that look like? You know, and for me, like Dark Khan, the musician, the first track that I played, that song which features Jean Khan, who sings on that track called Infant Eyes, is precisely like, it kind of just like embodied that politics, you know? Even like the song that played now, which is a track called Sizwile, which was an improvised song by the woman on vocals is Nonkupiri. And the way she sings that song for me is like, she does exactly what I can't talk about, but kind of represents the sort of like politics in the emotion, like the way that she holds a song is so genius, and the way she holds it with Malcolm, the guy who also sings behind her or in front of her or with her, I never know, but they hold the song very well together. And it's an improvised song about responding to 1976, actually, in South Africa. So they just did it on the spot, and that was their response to the question of like, the lingering question of like, you know, South Africa as a country that's still irresolved, or it's an irresolvable like question in a lot of ways. So that's one example, you know, there were literally musicians who were put in a room, shown different footage of what had happened in the 70s in this country. And they were asked to respond to that. And they make this beautiful album that I feel has a potential to politicize a lot of people, you know, saying that in fact the world, the earth, the land belongs to the children of the people who work the land, you know. And like it says, I'll just say it in Zulu and then I'll translate it. It says, "Ingane zobaba zifanele ukudla ilifa lomhlaba," you know, the children of our forefathers deserve to eat the inheritance of the land. That was their response to that. So there are a lot of ways in which music, if directed in the right way, can actually like sort of like push people who are sometimes not as politically like in your face or on the nose as like, you know, as some people may be, to actually start thinking about these things and like pushing them out to wherever they are. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Numbuso. Bongoi, how do we build this infrastructure?
It's a big question.
You always ask big
That's true. You always ask big questions. So just some offerings, really. I think about trying to see how to organize my thoughts. They'll probably not be organized. I think about what skills we need for regeneration, and that we actually need.
Oh dear, Wangoi, you are frozen.
Anew, that we need for regeneration. And I also want to define regeneration. Oh, okay. Internet is interneting.
It's fine now. You're good now.
Okay. Thank you, Lana. I tend to speak very slowly on things like these because I know my internet. I want to share like how I define regeneration, how I think of regeneration, what regeneration means for me. And this is part of that, like how do we build, how do we do this? One of those aspects for me has been to find principles. And I think about new old principles that are sprouting from that abundance, sprouting from even the compost of the things that we know need to go. That's beginning elsewhere. So I think about finding principles, and where I look at indigenous ways of being on this continent, and there's millions. I only know a handful. But so it's an ongoing project. And this is also part of my reskilling for regeneration. So I think of regeneration as 3 things and a 4th. So preventing death, healing dis-ease, adding life, And then in order to do these things, we have to have sovereignty, individual sovereignty as well as communal sovereignty. And all of those things is like a way of checking against what I'm doing. Am I preventing death? Am I healing disease? Am I adding life? And I need sovereignty. I need to be in my power. I need to have full sight and knowledge and awareness of my being, my wholeness, and as well in community, having that. So that's one thing. I think about how we can gently, very tenderly dismantle the armors that we have put on while we've been surviving, while we've been resisting. And I think for most of us to have made it to this point, we've had to survive, we've had to resist, yeah, to get to where we are now. And what that generally does is that you build up certain skills, certain armor. So I think about how the dismantling of that in very gentle and very tender ways, expanding our capacities so that we can heal, so that we are not replicating what we had to do to survive while we are trying to build our freedom dreams. So that we are not being colonial with each other, which often happens in our movement spaces because many of us are harmed, many of us are wounded. And when we move from that wounded place, not having had the space, the skills, the capacity, the holding, the community to heal, we replicate those forms of abuse. I think about expanding our capacity to feel, which is part of that healing. It's being brave enough to be vulnerable as people who have been harmed, as people who have been wounded. I think if we do not expand our capacities to feel or actually reclaim our capacities to feel and to be vulnerable, I wonder, will we even enjoy those freedom dreams once we build them? Will we be able to feel and assess the truth of those freedom dreams as we build them? For me, process is much more important than product. And if we think about, those goals, those utopias that we have, if we think of them as products, how we do that, the process itself is much more important. One of my teachers, or I've seen this a couple of times, like, product is only a snapshot of a process, of a point in a process. And if the process is not great, the product will never be. And then I think about refusing to become hard. Said in the positive, staying soft. How do we stay soft? Even when within those movements, those harms get replicated. How do we not, throw up our hands and be like, no, it's not possible. It's impossible. Look, even the people who claim to be holding to the utopias and the dreams, even they mess up. It's true, they mess up. But staying with it enough to see the reason why, to see the thing that is behind that, and staying soft, a commitment to staying soft, even if not, in direct relationship to, let's say, a person who has caused harm, but in our lives as a way of being, and in our movements, a commitment to staying soft. I think about the need for physical spaces. I love the online things and the beauty that they allow. I also love when we create in like pop-up spaces, and I also really believe that we need to have physical spaces to gather together, My research is often around, it's not often around, it is about practices, life practices, for two reasons. One is because often the people, well, for a number of reasons actually, I don't know how many. One is this dichotomy, the false dichotomy of, well, the mind is above the body. That's a lie. So I focus on practices to reclaim the body and honor the body and look to the body as a profound site of knowledge. Second, because often the people who do things with their hands are the ones who have been told that they don't know, that they can't think, don't have anything revolutionary about themselves. And oftentimes that's women, that's queer people, that's workers, that's, you know. And then because I really believe that the revolution is in our practices. It's in, what do I do when I meet you? What do I do when we're in a space together and we wake up and then, you know, ... the continuation of that story. And so physical spaces allow us to create that liminality of coming together so that we can actually practice living in those freedom dreams, so that we can actually practice how do we stay soft, so that we can actually practice what do we do when the contradictions show up, what do we do when the conflicts, what do we do when we recognize the simple truth that yes, we have been harmed, and that we sometimes do act from that. Ooh, wow. The lights just went. But you can see me. Oh, I mean, you can hear me, so it's fine.
We can hear you. We can hear you. Don't worry.
I'll just keep going. And not only when you know, kind of the pain shows up, but also the joy. What do we do with the joy? Because part of like having been harmed is, you know, the reduction of our capacities or of our abilities to even feel that joy, to recognize that joy when it's there, when it shows up. And did I want to, okay, I have to look at my notes because the lights have gone. Yeah, and then I think the last two things that I will share, which I probably don't know the full profoundness of what they mean because they came through me. One was humility and honesty. So some like beginning thoughts, because I think it's probably a life lesson. Humility and honesty, being humble about what I know, what I don't know, where my wounds are, where my joys are, where my gifts are. Being honest, showing up in that fullness, not claiming what is not mine to claim. And then power and gratitude. So moving from power, and power is not the same thing as control. Something I came back to recently was abuse is not about violence, it's about control. And being also, again, humble and honest about those places where I am controlling. Why? Because I've been formed in as an abusive space, yeah, in an abusive paradigm. Staying humble and honest about, you know, what has made me me, and also claiming with power and gratitude where I want to go and where I see community going, where I see life going for all of us. Yeah, I think I will stop there. Then you can stop looking at just like a dark screen and maybe my teeth.
Wangoi, no Kenya Power fashioned against us shall prosper. Yeah, but you're lucky your internet. Mine, everything went, I had to come back. You know what, please, I beg you, step on our necks, step on us. We are the floor. We are willing. We are ready. Step on us. My goodness, I'm sitting here trying to be very respectable, and I just want to scream and jump. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. Wangoi, what you just said reminds me of two things. One is a quote by the Sandinistas, and it says that solidarity is an expression of the people's tenderness. The other is a quote by Black French feminist filmmaker Alice Diop, who says that tenderness is a political project lived every day. And when I think about what you say about being soft, which is so difficult because the kinds of harm we experience, we just want to be like, let's square up, let's meet outside, let's do WWE on each other. And it's really difficult to be soft, right? It's hard to be soft. We are broken in many ways, even as we are whole in many ways, but it's hard to be soft. But it's good to remember from what you said and from the Sandinistas and from the quote by Alice that these are political projects lived every day, right? The process is every day. It's not just the utopia, it's not just a product, it's things we live every single day. The commitment to wake up in the morning, the commitment to tenderness, the commitment to kindness, the commitment to a radical politics, the commitment to work through our contradictions, the commitment to dialogue across difference, but to add what Audre Lorde says, with people who share a vision and a dream for liberation with us. So I will thank you. Step on us. I'll pass it to Moshibudi to continue stepping on us as we conclude.
If I may add just a bit,
Okay.
just two quick things is that commitment to softness. I swear it's impossible to hold it by yourself. Community, we heal in community. And I'll also kind of define what I mean by community. Community is, for me, humans, our earth relations, and unembodied spirit beings together. Like, you and I know, Ruth, this year has been like, I would not have been able to stay committed to being soft without community, without ritual, without people to cry with, without witness, community witness, with all of that. Like community holds us. And that's why I think I'm so like, where are we building those physical spaces for us to gather, for us to enact community, for us to be with each other in community, because community is not, it's practice, it's our practices. And then there's the final thing I wanted to which is like from what we've already spoken about, is to constantly lift our eyes up to the horizon of our dreams. And I think that's really embodied in that question that you asked us at the beginning. Why, beyond just what we are against, why are we doing this? What is it for? So to have that as a constant practice of lifting our eyes up to the horizon, like, yes, this is why we are in this. This is why we are here. This is the beauty that we came to add to life.
Thank you. Moshibudi, you can continue in the process of stepping on us.
Have I successfully unmuted this time?
Yes, yes.
I was thinking when Nombuso and Ongui were talking that something else that I think it's really important for us to start doing is to refuse a certain pace of time and temporality, So a lot of the things is, what do you want now? What do you need now? Let's have short-term, middle-term, and long-term demands, etc. And I think for myself, a big part is to stop that time, right? To stop that work time, whether it be woke time, neoliberal time, and to say, I'm okay with not being able to articulate exactly what it is that I desire in this moment. And that doesn't make me deserving of harm. I deserve space and time for pause. I deserve space and time for reflection. I deserve space and time to get to know myself before it is that I'm forced to perform a version of myself for others. And I think, I'm not sure if that's a reclamation of time, because I struggle with, or it's just an observance of a different type of time. And I think we need to start observing other temporalities that allow us a deserved space to be not only in discomfort with others, but discomfort with ourselves as well. And those contradictions that we spoke about. So I think one is to refuse a time that is insisted upon us. That is crucial to giving ourselves space to be able to do the type of dream work, creation work that we want. But another thing that I've found really important is to not accept a version of solidarity that requires a sacrificing of self. So to refuse those communities that you are welcomed only through a sacrificing of parts of yourselves that you find important. And there is no project radical enough, progressive enough, important enough that it's deserving of yourself being sacrificed and those who you care and love about being sacrificed. And for me, this is why we need that dislocation of a very aggressive, masculine, narcissistic version of what radical regenerative politics is, right? This idea that we have to continue sacrificing parts of ourselves for something bigger. Something bigger that I dream about wants me to build myself to be able to enter it, not to sacrifice myself. And I think that's also been important for me. I think the other thing is to not be shy about the things that we desire that we don't think are political, right? So I think that there's certain things that are acceptable to want, right? And so we limit the spaces that we organize in and that we reflect in to those things. But for me, what's truly revolutionary is to be able to come with all my desires, whether or not I understand how those desires can be political, you know, or they're not couched in the language of politics that we understand. And that for me is important, whether it's been the women who have fought for their for a space for the type of expression of sexuality that is deemed, you know, unpolitical, non-political, you know, etc. Or it's for people who've just presented in ways that confuse us. And so for me, it's important as well to make it about myself, is that I don't have to be in alignment with everyone within my collective for us to be able to hold space of care and love for each other. I don't have to understand the ways in which people show up. And so I think it's not only about living with our own contradictions, but it's allowing ourselves to be troubled by the existence of others as well. Because, you know, growth can't come from a place of comfort. But importantly as well, I think we spoke about this idea of building solidarity across difference, for me, has to be steeped in realizing and giving integrity to each of those places of difference, right? So it's not just this type of verbose multiculturalism or diversity and all these things we know that capital's co-opted, but it's a true profound respect and witnessing of a difference, whether that difference makes us uncomfortable or not, and being able to sit with that uncomfortability, like Nombuso said, in ways that don't make other people have to shy away into the shadows, diminish themselves, make their desires smaller to be able to fit into whatever political box we've created of acceptability. And so I think also a lot of the times we really have to think about acceptability, right? What's acceptable? Not to create borders, but what does that politics do of only being able to legitimate particular types of expression in particular spaces. You know, what does it mean that acceptability is even a thing? What does that mean to have to accept? You know, what can I add to what others have said? I want to say something about this idea of physical space as well, because ownership has become perverted as well within a capitalist framework, you know, and we become scared to demand ownership of things outside of, or maybe we can talk about ownership of our bodies, but that's where it ends, right? Nothing else. And I think that laying claim to space is something that we are well within our deserved rights to do as well. And there's ways that we can do that that don't have to be collapsed into property lexicon, if that makes sense. I find that people shy away from wanting to make that claim for physical space, right? And I think that there's ways in which that claim for physical space, and we've been given examples, can be held that is not just a claim for property in the sense that capital understands it, right? And so when people speak of land, land is one of the most perverted cooptations, right, from the claim and power that we see, because we know that a claim for land is a claim for being, is a claim for rootedness, but it's also a claim for inheritance, right? And so I suppose the last thing I want to say is that we also have to be okay with being misunderstood, you know? And I mean, I'm a middle child, so maybe I was groomed into it. I was groomed into it. But being misunderstood doesn't make you a delinquent or deviant. It just means that in that moment, the dominant perspective doesn't have space to recognize you as you want to show up. And in as much as I think collective action, collective imagining, collective thinking is important, I also want to stress that people have to spend time with themselves and to know themselves, so that when we show up in those collectives, it doesn't become the work of others to make us, you know. So I take care of me because I understand how important it is that I exist in the space in a way in which I don't create harm for others. And so by taking care of me, I'm taking care of the collective. And that's important, right? Not only to understand that space to be able to take care of me, but to know that I'm taking care of the collective as I take care of myself. And perhaps the last thing I'll say quickly, because I'm cognizant of time, is that I think our dreams are always collective. I think our dreams are always collective, and sometimes I'll have dreams about my siblings. And if they're good dreams, I feel that joy deep within as if it's something that has happened to me. But on the other side, if there are bad dreams, you wake up shaking because you know that there's no way to separate. There's no way to separate. And this is what I meant about how capitalism has organized all of planetary life. There's no way to separate my well-being from that of others, from that of the world that we exist within. And at moments in which I think that type of demarcation is possible, then I know that there's a problem with both my own thinking and the space that I'm in at a moment. And the moment in which, you know, parts can be sacrificed for other parts, then there's a problem. So yeah, just to hold the space for the wholeness of all of creation, right? I think is important, and it's difficult and it does cause discomfort, but I think working through that keeping that at the center, that all of life is important, is really the root of what our practice should be.
Wow, our necks have been stepped on. I am not even gonna ask the three of you to give a closing statement, because this doesn't end, and I don't want it to end, because I want to have more conversations with you. And I'm not gonna translate or explain what you said, but I'm gonna read a poem as we close this space. Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model, born in Babylon, both non-white and woman. What did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. The poem is titled Won't You Celebrate With Me by Lucille Clifton. And I feel like I have been in celebration, a grand celebration with Moshibudi, Wangoi, Nombuso, and every single person who has been part of this conversation. I want to sincerely thank all of you who made time to come, and I don't even want to call it a conversation. It doesn't have a term. It doesn't have it. I refuse to give it a term today. Thank you so much. Thank you so much on behalf of the African Eco-Feminist Collective, the Feminist Republic, every single person who was responsible for making this last two webinars possible. It's been months in the making, and it's been such a tender community to be part of. And to see it come to life in this way has refreshed me in a way that I didn't think was possible. And so as I close this space, this particular space, Nombuso is going to play a set, an extended set. You're free to remain. Please don't leave. You don't have to leave, start the food if it's dinner, sit and reflect wherever you are and listen to the music. We will send out the recording from last week and this recording. We also send Nombuso's playlist from last time and this time. Once again, thank you, Wangoi. Thank you, Moshibudi. Thank you, Nombuso. Thank you, everyone, in tender love and solidarity.
Thank you. فتي ودغيوك شاف يا بنية بيقى غسمان وكدا يندق داتاك اللال ايه هضوادة يمين لها ينار طوهاض دغمان لها النار الجن تسني تقلب تلا يا هي تشي تنطقك هي تلا يا دودي تسجن يا كاليدة نابو مدية هيك ور هيك خير ولا نضرك يلا إلهي يلي ماني ورهتك دخشن جانين ويتقاتنين في قرابين يا هين هيا يا إشوار النيق مغنيقا يرهي عطيك لي يرهي غوغل تقداله هي تريكوغل يا قلبي يا قلبوغل لغضمضي نرها مدل تجاهي جسمس هلو تنجن ستيكر يسمنوكل وسيلي لها سليبوغل كرابسي لمد السيسل ما يقدالن يسوف يدرو يقلا ساخبي بس ديتيدو بقاتل من اسهاسي ميدي انا خرومين يا سميدي نرد ورجي غير التيرو طارت وادغ نداسيدي فلاسي ساقنانيدو اني ابراهيم يبطل الله حي اني اياد كنت نقدر بسم الله هرسي هاهي يا رميت ندبو باشي التانغا تنتينانان نكاسك اليوم اي جلوان مقرو ينحاق اصحي غاضاق يتهيم يغدق المال يا واضح دنيك دت مالي الوطن دي ورناني ما هي درضن يارا للشو صور وايد تجيد مسره ترني دغيتي جاضو تغش منه تبضودي الناس بلغة شر ورفليجة وارتدي ومنك ورهي وين Kangangenga shalaganja Kangangenga negoti shalaganja Hey kangangenga negoti shalaganja Kangangenga shalaganja Goti sogalinja Gobu shalagema Goti sogalinja Gobu shalagema Goti sogalinja Gobu shalagema But it's all getting junk. Go with the land, Bangangeng
Nombuso, are we at the end?
Yes, that's the
Oh,
end. Thank you so much.
thank you so much. You know, I'm messaging with a few friends who are listening on WhatsApp, and they're like, "This is amazing music." Thank you so much to you, Nombuso. Thank you so much, Ongoisi. You're still on, and to everyone who stayed to listen to the set with us. Thank you so much. Take care. Lots of love and solidarity with all of you. Have a good evening from here in Nairobi and from wherever you are.